Good evening, Louisa.
Good evening.
Miri and I are very excited to welcome you to this conversation and also to welcome you as part of this project in memory of Judy. We've called it a tribute to Judy. And we've called the whole project Memory Lost and Memory Found, a conversation about and with Judy. So essentially it's an opportunity to remember her, to think about her memory within us, and also to continue to engage with and to associate with some of her ideas. And as you know, we've used a start point, her paper about memory in group relations conferences and networks. And it was a paper that she presented at Opus in 2010, and then was published in the Reflective Citizen and also in Kav Ofek's journal. So tonight with me, as I said, is Miri Tzadok, and I'm Leila Jamal. And it's particularly meaningful to have you here, especially as a close friend and longtime colleague of Judy's. And in a way, I don't know, I was thinking that in a way you represent some of Judy's internationalness. As we know, Judy had a very rich life, sort of both in Israel and outside Israel, and lots of friendships there. And somehow it seemed fitting. So yeah, so here we are. And we thought perhaps that we would begin with some personal reflections.
I remember your phone call very, very well. I was in Germany. I was not in Italy. I was in Germany, and I was at a party of her 70th birthday. And when I saw Leila's phone call, I said, oh, I will not answer now, I'll do it later. But then something instinctively said I should answer, and I was terribly shocked. I couldn't even imagine and think that Judy has passed away. It was something so unreal and unbelievable. So that was really very shocking. And it's interesting that we are here today, the three of us, to talk about Judy. Yeah. So in trying to recollect, the thing is that trying to think about this conversation, I wanted to sit and write something which could be interesting, or so think about it, and it was very, very difficult for me to do it. And I didn't think it would have been so difficult when you suggested that you would interview me. I really couldn't do it. I couldn't start, and then I said, why I can't do this, and why it's so difficult, and also to read the article was difficult. And then I realized that it was about the death and about the loss and about mourning, and but to get away of it helped me very much. So that was. So as we said, we start with the personal dimension. I met Judy in 1997, my first OFEC retreat. I don't know if Miri, you were there, but or not.
I don't think so.
No, it was a long time ago. And what impressed me so much was her accent, her very British accent, which impressed me because I was born in Cambridge and lived my first years in Cambridge. My first language was English, so I had a lot. And she remembered me that environment, that sounds, that smells, that. So for me, she was, as I said in the note I wrote when she died, she was the English lady in Israel. So her voice was something which impressed me very much. And then we became friends, but we became friends in a very special circumstances, because it was the 2006, there was the Lebanese war, and suddenly Ilana called me, Ilana Litvin, who is a friend, saying that she and Judy wanted to come urgently to Italy. They wanted to come in August, which is a bad time to come to Milan. They wanted to come to Milan. It's bad time to come to Milano because it's completely empty. So I suggested we go to the mountains. And they said, okay, the mountains, but it needed to be near an airport, because if something happened in Israel, they wanted to come back. So we went to Courmayeur, which is a bit a fancy place. It's a fancy place because I thought that we're not mountain climbers, and we thought that we needed some shops and restaurants and have fun, and we had a good time. But in that time, I didn't speak so much with Judy, but I spoke a lot with Judy the next time we went to the mountains. I think it was a year after we went to the Swiss Alps. And we went walking, and I had a lot of conversations with Judy, and so I managed to know her much better there. So that was how my friendship with Judy started. And then I went many times to Jerusalem. First, I didn't stay with her, but then in the last years, I also stayed with her. And we met many times. One of the things I remember of Judy, which impressed now that I'm thinking about it, Judy had some wonderful British cups in her flat. And I asked her, where did you buy them? And she said she bought them in a shop in Jerusalem. And I have still all this, I bought the same cups, and I have still them, I use them when I have guests here.
It sounds lovely, actually. Yeah.
And among the last memories is the Belgirate Conference 2008, which was the one before this one. After the conference, Ilana and Judy came to stay with me. And Judy wanted always to come and stay with me here in Milano, take a car and go around in the countryside. That was her dream, but she never managed. But that time Ilana wanted to go to museums, and Judy wanted to go to outside Milano to see some small town. So I had to decide what to do. And but the weather was so horrible. It was there were floods, and Judy wanted to go in a place that you had to go through the river, over the river. So I got very worried about Judy catching a train alone, not speaking the language. And so I decided to go with her. Ilana could go around museums here in Milano. And so we spent a very nice day together. And after she passed away, I said it was very nice that I was able to do this with her. So this is, I think, I remember Judy always very independent and a very citizen of the world. She was very international in some aspects. And I remember she went to London. We met also in London. She spent a lot of time. She loved London because it was her origin.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about that, because one of my very strong memories of Judy was actually, I'm in the States. I met her in the States at an ISPSO meeting once. Later on, I also met her at airports. You know, I ran into her twice at the airport. So, you know, in a way, it's interesting about that part of her that was international as well as very Israeli in ways too.
Yeah, now that you tell me, I recall that conference of ISPSO in Philadelphia, and Judy, I was feeling quite lonely, and Judy invited me for dinner out with other people an evening, and I felt so welcomed, and it was so pleasant. So she was a connector, she was a catalyzer.
You know, it's connect me to the feeling that Judy had this very close and warm relationship with you and with some of the international figures of the GR community. And it always felt that she somehow has the capacity to bridge the formal and the informal. And I always felt that you and her are like part of her belonging really to the international community. I remember, by the way, that you came to visit me when I moved to Bet Nekofa. This was, and you came with her, and we had this nice chat in this house, and it felt like a relative came to my house, a relative of Judy.
Yes, I remember very well when we came to your house, and it was very nice. I remember the house. I remember it. Yeah. That was, yes, and I think you're right. She put together the informal and the formal, and yeah, she. But she loved often. She loved often.
You know, I think as well, when Miri, when you talk about the bridge, you know, for me, it was also sort of, she was able to bridge her academic world of literature and all of that together with, you know, the world of psychoanalysis and then group relations. And as you were saying, Louisa, she loved Ofek, or was engaged in it in a particular way, or it had a particular place in her life, I think, you know, and yeah.
She was a board member of ISPSO, but I remember that it was completely different. Her passion was in Ofek, not in ISPSO.
It's interesting also that in a way, you know, she directed an international conference months before she passed away. You know, it was almost like sort of coming back and this, and you know, this conference, which is, and you were there, Louisa. I mean, we were both working at that point.
Yeah, that was very impressive, because I never thought she would invite me. That was the most, I thought that she would never invite me, also because I tend to think that it's better not to work with your friends. It's better to work with people you know less. So I thought I will never be invited, and she invited me. And it was really, because I discovered Judy as a director, which is different. You can be a friend of a person, but you don't know how this person will direct. And she was an excellent director. She gave space to everybody. She listened to everybody. She enabled people to get the best out of their capacities. She was aware of that. Although Judy was insecure and she was often quite anxious, and she didn't believe in her competence and her skills sometimes, and she needed to be reassured about it. She was, I remember having a conversation with her saying, you know, during this conference, I managed to find my creative part. And I'm aware that if I don't feel a warm environment and enabling environment, it's more difficult for me. And she said, that's one of my, I know that's one of my capacities. And so that was very much there. Yeah, we had very good conversations at breakfast. Although we kept the boundaries, and as soon as somebody of the management would arrive, I would leave. But I had really good memories of those conversations. And also coming back from the conference, she gave me a lift. So, and I didn't ask her to give me a lift. I thought somebody else would give me a lift. But she offered to give me the lift because I was concerned it was too much for her to have somebody who had been on the staff, and perhaps she wanted to be on her own, but she offered. And we went through the part where she was brought up as a child. And she told me where she was brought up, what was the house. And it was very, very personal, and also very moving to hear all the stories of her parents and of this house. And yeah, it was incredible. I would never think it would be the last time I would be with her in the car. And then we had breakfast again in Jerusalem. She was busy with other people in the conference that she wanted to meet and to welcome them. And I invited her to have breakfast at St. Andrew's Hotel, because I was staying at the Scottish Hotel in Jerusalem, which has it's a beautiful hotel. And she came. My sister was in Israel too at the time, so we had breakfast. And that was the last time I saw her. Also, I spoke with her afterwards about, I think 2 weeks before she died, I spoke with her on the phone.
Yeah.
And we were planning that she comes to Italy, and exactly.
It's interesting about planning, because I had lunch with her 2 weeks before she passed away, and at that point I was going to be directing the next conference, and I had asked her to mentor me, and she was, yeah, absolutely. And that had been the plan. I discussed the theme with her, the title, you know, as I was working on it. And at some point in one of our conversations, she sort of expressed interest in being the administrator of the conference. And I was very excited by the idea, because I thought it would be an amazing learning around role, and it would be a continuation of working in a directorate with her. But in the end, you know, I for various reasons, I chose not to do that. And in that you know, we talked about it over lunch, and then, you know, and soon afterwards, she was no longer there, which was quite a loss. Yeah.
Well, maybe we will move to the second part, the article,
Yeah.
which in our earlier conversation, you felt that it was an important article and that it touches very important points. So what do you think? And also you said that it brought you to think about this in relation to family business, which really I find interesting because this is your expertise, right? And so maybe you will tell us some of your thoughts. It's interesting to hear it.
Yeah, yeah. So the paper, I must say, I found it the first time I read it a bit difficult, not the easiest paper I read. I found it very good. I think it's very important what she's, first of all, she goes through the concept of memory in literature and also the change of memory through times. And I thought it was very interesting, the idea of the collective memory versus the individual memory. So that's, I think it's very, very good that she has used through the sociologists. The paper, when I read the paper the first time, the thing which really had a big impact on me was one of the examples she makes about the casualty in a conference. And why did it make me so had such an impact? Because, and it helped me go back to that conference. I was on the staff of the conference where in which she describes this case and of the casualty. But by the way, speaking of memory, I was also the thing in this conference was that a person had a breakdown. And what had happened that a few years before, the same person had a breakdown in another conference. So, and this information about the breakdown had not been passed from one conference to another. And I had been also in the first conference because I was a member in the first conference. So, and I knew about this, and then it happened in the second conference again. So reading the article made me think about all this again, and made me think a lot about the issue of casualties in a conference, which is something which is not discussed very much in group relations. Every director knows that this can happen, but it's not very much discussed. And in this case, the sponsor organization was the same, the directors were not the same. So there was some information which didn't go through from one conference to another. And Judy argues that her argument about the lack of memory in the group relations community has to do with, she hypothesized, with a social defense against the loss linked to the temporary dimension of the conference and competition in a way. Perhaps she says it in a better way, but that was her hypothesis, to the competition of being in the staff, which leads you also to make the loss more painful, because you never know if you will be invited again on a group relations conference. So that's her hypothesis. So this issue about the casualty and the transmission of the memory of casualties is something which has always puzzled me, because I have, when I started directing a conference some years later, I've always been obsessed by the anxiety of having casualties in the conference and how to manage this, because I think this is a big responsibility. And personally, the way I I conceptualized and also applied it is putting a lot of emphasis on structure, not only relying on interpretation in terms of the containment, but also the structural containment. I think an organization with good structural containment and also obviously the dynamic part can avoid casualties because it's the holding and the containment of the conference. So one of the things I think always impressed me about the conferences is that people call the sponsoring organization called Louisa's conference, Miri's conference, Yael's conference, Leila's conference. So the conference is the ownership, it seems, of the director. But the ownership is not of the director. Ownership is of the sponsoring organization or the organizing organization. It's true the director is responsible, but the authority comes from the sponsorship. So I think that there's something in the relationship between the directorship and the sponsorship, in which the memory gets lost because there is not a transmission of the experience. As Judy says, all directors prepare a report, but it's not only the report; it's something more that needs to be transmitted. And also to have a casualty in the group relations culture is not something which a director is so happy to publicly acknowledge. It's something that usually is kept secret. So it's something which gets lost in the memory. And for me, beyond the things that Judy said about what is denied, or what is the social defense, it's also the responsibility, because there is a responsibility in all this. And it's something that who takes the responsibility and ownership of this? So this paper made me think, these were things I thought, I started the first time I directed, it was in 2005. And I have applied them, I've done it, but I've never got back to the origin. And Judy's paper made me think a lot about all this, and and wonder what happens, and the function also, the memory, the function of the sponsoring organization as containers of memory.
Mm. Yeah. It makes me think of, well, I don't know, my association went to the responsibility aspect, and how, in brochures of group relations conference in the past, they always used to, or many used to say, if you're going through a difficult period in your life now, perhaps it's not a good idea to come to the conference. And that seems to have been dropped sometimes. And then where is the responsibility? So that sort of makes me think about that.
Yeah, the issue is also, how can you say to somebody not to come to a conference? It's very difficult. It's not easy to do this. So, but the thing is not to forget it.
Yeah.
I remember that once we had some kind of worry like this. When I directed the conference, we had one participant that was living in the middle of a conference before. And I did have a conversation with him, asking him about his motivation and his states, and he came, and we didn't reject his participation, but I felt that it was something that the collective memory was very helpful. I knew it because I was, by the way, I was also in the staff of the other conference, so this is why I knew it. But it came when you talked, Louisa, I thought about responsibility and also narcissism. And maybe the memory is somehow working more in the service of the narcissistic needs of the director to have fully entire new organization and not realizing that it is part of a succession of and that there is a history. It just came up to my mind now when you talked.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And you open also another issue now, Miri, because there is an issue. How do you treat a casualty? Do you treat it individually or you treat it systemically? So the Orthodox would say you treat it systemically. But what you did, it was more an individual conversation in a systemic environment. And I think that's very important also to allow the individual space to the individual, not only to the systemic, because because the person may need to have a private conversation with the director, with the administrator, with the associate director, I don't know. And I think that's something which is not discussed very much in the group relations world. And I think what you brought is very important.
And Louisa, you also brought up something else to do with the article. Yeah, the family business piece.
Yeah, the family business, I say it briefly, is that the family business, it's the opposite of the group relations world. Also, I always think group relations is a family. Because in the family business, memory is so important because it's the legacy of the past, of the founders, the heritage, and because family business pursues continuity in the business, continuity in the family, continuity of values, of identity, and of culture. So one of the problems is changing in the family business because the people are very attached to all the myths, the beliefs of the pioneering times, and sometimes it's very difficult to change, especially if you have family business with people in their 90s who are still in the business and want to impose their value. So it's very different because I feel that memory is very present, and some big families also have books written on the family, and the problem is change in this. It's the opposite because this memory gets idolized. If you want to use a psychosocial language, it becomes a told story in respect to the lived experience. One is the story you tell, and one is the lived experience. So it's a told story that is told, and it's a very big part of the culture of the company. So while in group relations, I find there are some myths and some beliefs, but it's a bit more fragmented. It's a bit less used in as a glue or something developmental. In the family business, this is also used in a developmental, unless it gets too stuck, which happens sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think also that the question of identity is different. In family business, the identity relies on the history.
Yes.
Yes. And the group relation, it is more complicated, maybe. The identity of the conference is somehow needs to get rid of the history.
Yes.
Identity.
No memory, no desire. Yes, but in a very good article, Alan Schaefer wrote that the conference, he hypothesized that the conference are containers of anxieties of society. So they changed the title to represent the anxiety present in society. Each conference. So the context changed, the society changed, and each conference changes. That's his hypothesis. I thought it's very relevant also to our conversation now.
yeah, I mean, especially because it, you know, what is the collective memory, or what is the context, and what can be carried forward? I mean, I think, yeah, it'd be really interesting to look at, well, I'm sure it's been done, but conference titles over the years, and to see what has changed and how that, you know.
He has done it for the Australian conference.
Has he?
Yes, there's this article he wrote about it, and I think it's very interesting. And he collects all the titles of the conferences.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very nice to be here and talk. It's a nice way of remembering Judy. And Judy and her article gave us this opportunity.
Yeah.
Think through and to continue to think about her ideas and to engage with some of them. I think that's been really interesting and meaningful and thought-provoking. And, you know, even though we're coming to the end of this conversation, you know, there's a lot more to think about, and to, you know,
We could continue for hours.
Yeah, thank you, Louisa, for you know, overcoming this, I think, maybe painful resistance to talk about Judy, but I think we do succeed to talk about Judy and also with Judy. This is the idea, that we are continue something in her, with her thinking and ideas. We play with it. Continue to play with it.
I would like to continue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, to be continued, maybe not in this forum, but, you know,
Yeah.
Mary said, you know, it's a way of talking with her.
Yes.
And both remember, you know, both about her and with her.
Yeah.
So, thank you very, very much.
Thank you both. It was really good. Very stimulating. I would go on and on and on.